You know that moment at 1:47 a.m. when you're wide awake, completely exhausted, but your brain absolutely refuses to stop. You're not thinking about anything useful. You're replaying a conversation from Tuesday, word by word, tone by tone, wondering if what you said came across wrong. You're running simulations about next week's meeting like it's a Hollywood thriller, except you're the one who might get destroyed. You're building entire catastrophes out of nothing, stacking worst-case scenario on top of worst-case scenario until the whole tower collapses on top of you at 2 a.m. And here's the part that really stings. While you've been lying there, someone with half your self-awareness and twice your nerve just made the call you've been putting off for 3 weeks. They didn't have more information than you. They didn't have a better plan. They just decided and moved. And now they're sleeping like a baby while you're still running the same mental loop for the 47th time. That's not intelligence. That's not caution. That's a trap. And you've been living inside it. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what's happening in your brain, why it keeps doing this to you, and most importantly, the surprisingly simple way out. Not a 90-day program, not a complex framework, something you can actually use today. But I need you to do one thing. Don't overthink this while you're reading it. Chapter 1. The Overthinking Epidemic. Here's something nobody tells you about the era we live in. We are the most informed, most connected, most option-rich generation in the history of humanity. And we are absolutely paralyzed by it. Think about your great-grandparents for a second. They didn't spend 3 days researching which cooking oil had the best omega-3 profile. They didn't lie awake wondering if their career was aligned with their authentic self. They didn't have 17 tabs open comparing mattress reviews before buying one. They had limited choices, and that limitation, as frustrating as it sounds, gave them something priceless. Clarity. Not because they were smarter, not because they were braver, but because when you only have 2 roads in front of you, choosing one isn't that complicated. When you have 200 roads, every single one illuminated by a different influencer, a different Reddit thread, a different podcast episode, suddenly the act of choosing feels like it carries the weight of your entire future, and your brain, bless it, takes all of that completely seriously. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. Your brain has something neuroscientists call the default mode network, a cluster of regions that activates when you're not focused on a specific task. It's the mental background music that plays when you're in the shower, staring out a window, or trying to fall asleep. It's the part of you that narrates, worries, replays, and plans. This network evolved for a world that no longer exists. 50,000 years ago, overthinking could literally save your life. You heard something snap in the undergrowth. You had to decide predator or fallen branch, run or investigate. That moment of careful mental processing was the difference between survival and becoming something's dinner. Your ancestors, who paused to think before acting, were more likely to survive. That's who you come from. Overthinkers. The problem is, your brain never got the memo that the jungle is gone. Today, when you're deciding whether to send a follow-up email to a recruiter, your brain treats it with the same chemical urgency as a charging predator. Cortisol floods your system. Your fight-or-flight response fires up. And instead of making a calm 2-sentence decision, you're suddenly drafting 17 versions of that email in your head, each one more carefully worded than the last. until you've spent 45 minutes on something that required 45 seconds. This isn't weakness. This isn't a character flaw, it's an ancient protection system misfiring in a modern world. But here's what makes it genuinely dangerous. The average adult makes somewhere in the range of 35,000 decisions per day. Not big ones. Most of them are tiny. What to look at first on your phone, what tone to use in a text message, whether to take the stairs or the elevator. Most of these get processed automatically. But when you're an overthinker, a percentage of those micro decisions gets escalated, treated as if they require full deliberation, full analysis, full commitment of mental resources. And mental resources are not infinite. This is why researchers talk about decision fatigue, the documented, measurable decline in the quality of your decisions as your day goes on. It's not a metaphor, it's biology. Every decision you make, especially every decision you overthink, depletes a cognitive reserve that doesn't refill until you sleep. This is exactly why some of the most effective leaders in the world have almost robotically simplified their daily routines, not because they're lazy, but because they understand something most people don't. If you spend your best mental energy on small things, you'll have nothing left for the things that actually change your life. Every morning, you spend 20 minutes deciding what to wear to the gym is 20 minutes of cognitive fuel you can't spend on the conversation that actually matters that afternoon. And it compounds, day after day, week after week. But here's what really makes overthinking insidious. It doesn't just drain you. It actively makes you worse at the thing you're trying to do, which is make good decisions. Because the longer you analyze something, the more doubt you introduce. Your first instinct, the one your gut fired at you in the first 30 seconds, gets buried under layers of, but what if? And on the other hand, what was once clear becomes murky. What was once simple becomes impossibly complex. Your best thinking is often your first thinking. Your worst thinking is the thinking you do at hour 3 of analyzing a decision that should have taken 10 minutes. The most decisive people you admire aren't decisive because they're reckless. They're decisive because they've learned to trust something you've been taught to distrust, themselves. And that is the thing we're going to rebuild together. Chapter 2. What's actually happening in your brain. Let's get specific, because understanding this changes everything. When you slip into overthinking mode, really deep overthinking mode, it's not just one thing happening in your brain. It's a cascade, a domino effect of neurological events that feed each other and build on each other until you're completely locked. Here's the sequence. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and executive function, kicks into high gear. Imagine a computer that's running many programs simultaneously. Everything slows down. The fan gets louder. Eventually, nothing responds the way it should. That's your prefrontal cortex under overthinking conditions. It's working harder, but producing less. At the same time, your anterior cingulate cortex, think of this as your brain's internal alarm bell, starts ringing. This region monitors for conflicts and inconsistencies, and it's extraordinarily sensitive. It doesn't just notice real threats, it notices potential threats, imagined threats, the kind that exist only in the future you're constructing in your head. And once it starts ringing, it's very hard to turn off. Then your amygdala, the ancient fear hub buried deep in your brain, joins the party. It releases cortisol and adrenaline. And here's the cruel part. Those chemicals were designed to help you move fast in response to a physical threat. But when the threat is abstract, a conversation that hasn't happened yet, a decision that doesn't have a deadline, those same chemicals just swirl around, creating a feeling of urgency without a direction to point it in. So you feel intensely alert and completely stuck at the same time. Sound familiar? Now here's where it gets even more interesting and more important. Every time you go through this cycle, every time you choose to analyze instead of act, your brain lays down a neural pathway. Think of it like a trail through a field. The first time you walk it, it's barely visible. The 10th time, it's a clear path. The 100th time, it's a groove so deep you follow it without even thinking. This is neuroplasticity working against you. You've literally trained your brain to default to overthinking through repetition. It becomes automatic. It starts to feel natural. It starts to feel like that's just who you are. It isn't. One of the most compelling studies on this topic came from researchers who were examining how people make complex decisions, specifically about things with many variables, like choosing between several job offers or making a significant purchase. They divided participants into 3 groups. The first group made immediate decisions. The second group was given time to consciously deliberate. The third group was given a distraction task, something unrelated, so their unconscious mind could work on the problem. The results were stunning and slightly humbling for anyone who prides themselves on deep analysis. The group that was distracted, the group that couldn't consciously overthink, consistently made the best choices. Why? Because your unconscious mind is a processing powerhouse that operates completely beneath your awareness. While your conscious mind, the one you identify as you, the one doing all the worrying, can hold roughly 7 pieces of information at once, your unconscious mind is running calculations on millions of data points simultaneously. It's drawing on your entire lifetime of experience, every pattern you've ever noticed, every outcome you've ever observed. When you overthink, you're not enhancing this process. You're interfering with it. You're taking a supercomputer offline and replacing it with a calculator, then wondering why everything feels so slow and clunky. There's another cognitive phenomenon worth understanding here, and it's called temporal discounting dysfunction. In plain language, when your brain is stuck in analysis mode, it becomes terrible at accurately weighing short-term costs against long-term benefits. It magnifies small, immediate risks and shrinks large future opportunities. This is why someone will spend 6 months researching whether to start investing, paralyzed by fear of market volatility, while completely ignoring the enormous compounding cost of not investing during that 6 months. The small risk feels enormous. The enormous opportunity becomes invisible. Your overthinking brain is literally distorting your perception of reality. And the saddest part? You're doing all of this mental suffering to protect yourself from outcomes that most of the time would be completely manageable, even if they did occur. Here's the good news, and it's genuinely good news. Neuroplasticity works both ways. The same mechanism that trained your brain to default to overthinking can train it to default to decisive action. Every single time you catch yourself in the loop and choose to act instead, even imperfectly, even incompletely, you're laying down a new neural pathway, a new groove, A new default. You're not broken. You're just running old software on a brain that's fully capable of installing something better. Chapter 3. The hidden price tag you never see. Let's have an honest conversation about what this is actually costing you. Not in vague, abstract terms. In real, concrete, measurable things that you will never get back. First, time. Research suggests that a habitual overthinker spends somewhere between 2 and 4 hours every single day in unproductive mental loops. Let's be conservative and call it 2 hours. That's 14 hours a week, 56 hours a month, over 670 hours a year. 670 hours. You could learn a new language in that time. You could build a meaningful side business. You could read over 100 books. You could train for and complete an athletic event that would transform your health and your confidence. Instead, that time went to mental rehearsals of conversations that happened differently than you imagined, worry about outcomes that never materialized, and analysis of decisions that resolved themselves eventually anyway. Second, opportunity. This one is harder to quantify, but it's the most devastating. Because opportunities don't wait. The job listing you bookmarked to apply to, once you had time to craft the perfect application, someone else sent a decent application immediately and got the interview. The person you wanted to ask out but spent 2 weeks building up the nerve. They met someone at a coffee shop on a Tuesday and are now 3 months into a relationship. The investment you are going to make once you've done just a little more research. The window closed, the market moved, the moment passed. Overthinking doesn't protect you from making mistakes. It guarantees a specific kind of mistake. The mistake of doing nothing when doing something would have changed everything. And that mistake is the kind that leaves the deepest marks. Because it's the kind that comes with a word that's almost impossible to shake. Regret. Not the regret of trying something and having it go sideways. You can make peace with that. It's the regret of standing at the edge, seeing the possibility clearly, and then stepping back. That's the regret that follows you. Third, confidence. Here's a pattern that almost nobody talks about. Chronic overthinking doesn't just happen in a vacuum. Every time you second-guess yourself, every time you analyze a decision past the point of usefulness, every time you override your gut with your anxiety, you send your subconscious a message. I don't trust you. And your subconscious, which is, remember, the part of you that's actually running most of the show, starts to believe it. It starts to perform like something untrustworthy. It stops offering you clear instincts because you keep ignoring them. It stops giving you confident reads on situations because you keep overriding them with worry. Over time, this erodes into something psychologists call learned helplessness, a state where you genuinely begin to believe that your choices don't matter, that outcomes are outside your control, that you're fundamentally unsuited to navigate uncertainty. And once you're there, the overthinking gets worse, because now you're not just uncertain about decisions, you're uncertain about yourself. Fourth, your health. This is not metaphorical. Chronic overthinking activates the same physiological stress response as genuine physical danger. Your body cannot tell the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. So, when you're lying in bed catastrophizing about a conversation, your heart rate elevates, your immune function suppresses, your digestive system slows down, your muscles tense, and your cortisol levels rise. If this happens occasionally, your body handles it fine. If it happens every single day, If you are perpetually in a low-grade stress state from chronic mental rumination, the cumulative damage is real. Elevated blood pressure, disrupted sleep, increased susceptibility to illness, higher risk of anxiety and depression. You are literally making yourself sick by thinking too hard about things you can't control. Fifth, the present moment. And perhaps this is the most quietly devastating cost of all. Your life is happening right now, not in the hypothetical future you're building in your head, not in the replayed past you keep revisiting. Right now, in this moment, there are things worth noticing, worth feeling, worth being inside of. But when your mind is 3 days ahead of you or 3 days behind, when it's running scenarios and simulations instead of being here, you miss it. You miss the conversation. You miss the sunset. You miss the small, irreplaceable moment that would have made you smile. And the compound effect of missing thousands of those moments over months and years is a life that feels strangely hollow, despite being objectively full. The antidote is not complicated, but it requires you to be willing to trust something more than your anxiety. It requires you to act. Chapter 4. Why Your Brain is Lying to You. Let's get something straight right now. Your brain is not your enemy. It's not trying to ruin your life, sabotage your relationships, or keep you small. When it pulls you into overthinking, it genuinely believes it's protecting you. It's working for you, just with a map that's about 50,000 years out of date. Understanding this distinction matters, because the moment you stop fighting your brain and start working with it, everything shifts. So let's talk about why your brain defaults to overthinking in the first place, and why those reasons made perfect sense once upon a time. Evolutionary psychologists call it the better safe than sorry principle. For the vast majority of human history, caution was survival. The humans who paused before stepping into an unfamiliar clearing, who second-guessed the berries they'd never seen before, who mentally rehearsed possible dangers before venturing into new territory. Those humans lived. They passed on their genes. They built families and communities and eventually civilizations. You are the direct descendant of the worriers, the analyzers, the ones who thought twice. And for a long time, that was an extraordinary gift. But the world changed faster than evolution could follow. The danger shifted from physical to social, from immediate to abstract, from real to imagined. And your brain, this magnificent, ancient, deeply loyal organ, didn't get the update. It's still running the same risk assessment software it always has, applying it to situations that software was never designed to handle. When you're lying awake at night, worrying about whether your manager's silence in a meeting meant something, your brain is treating it with the same chemical urgency as a predator in the darkness. When you're paralyzed about whether to send that message or make that call or take that step, your nervous system is firing as if physical survival is on the line. It isn't. But your brain doesn't know that. Researchers call this a threat detection malfunction. Your early warning system, calibrated beautifully for sudden physical dangers, is now perpetually triggered by abstract, future-oriented concerns that may never materialize. And because these concerns live in the future rather than the present, they can never be fully resolved through more thinking. You can always find another angle to worry about, another variable to introduce, another "but what if" to chase down. This is why overthinking doesn't end. It just evolves. There's another layer to this, and it's called the negativity bias. One of the most well-documented phenomena in human psychology. Your brain is not a neutral processing machine. It is specifically, measurably, consistently more sensitive to potential losses than to equivalent potential gains. Studies have shown this repeatedly. Losing something registers psychologically at roughly twice the intensity of gaining the same thing. Losing $20 feels worse than finding $20 feels good. Missing an opportunity stings longer than catching one feels satisfying. This made sense when resources were scarce, and losing anything could mean real deprivation. But in today's world, this bias quietly distorts every decision you make. Your brain is always scanning harder for what could go wrong than for what could go right. It finds threats in places where there are none. It magnifies risks that are minor and shrinks opportunities that are significant. And here's what nobody talks about. The bias gets stronger the longer you deliberate. Because the longer you think about something, the more time your brain has to generate new threats, new downsides, new reasons to hesitate. Analysis doesn't produce clarity for an overthinker. It produces more material for worry. Then there's the paradox of choice, a concept that's been studied extensively and confirmed repeatedly. Even if it cuts against everything our culture tells us about freedom and options. When researchers set up a tasting table at a grocery store and offered shoppers 24 varieties of jam, only about 3% of shoppers who stopped actually made a purchase. When they reduced the options to 6 varieties, nearly 30% bought jam. More choices produced less action. Less choice produced more decisiveness. Your brain has a finite capacity for comparison. When you push past that capacity, when you're weighing 17 job options or researching 48 mattresses or reading every review ever written about a restaurant before booking, you don't become better informed. You become overwhelmed. And overwhelmed brains default to one of two responses: impulsive choice or complete avoidance. Most overthinkers land in the avoidance category. And layered on top of all of this is something called fear of regret, perhaps the most powerful driver of overthinking in intelligent, self-aware people. Your brain has learned through experience that making the wrong choice produces a painful emotional state. So it tries to prevent that pain by analyzing every option exhaustively, trying to find the path that guarantees no regret. But here's the brutal paradox at the heart of this entire chapter. The attempt to avoid regret through overthinking virtually guarantees the deepest form of regret. Because while you're analyzing, time keeps moving. Opportunities keep expiring. And eventually, you look back, not at a bad decision you made, but at a door you stood in front of for so long that it closed before you ever walked through. The regret of inaction is heavier than the regret of action. Studies on end-of-life reflection confirm this consistently. People regret the things they didn't do far more intensely and persistently than the things they did, the business they didn't start, the trip they didn't take, the person they never told how they felt. Your brain is trying to protect you from pain, but the mechanism it's using is producing the exact pain it's trying to prevent. The way out isn't to try to think your way around this. You can't think your way out of a thinking problem. The way out is to understand these mechanisms clearly enough that you can recognize them when they're running, and then choose, consciously and deliberately, to act anyway, not recklessly, not blindly, but bravely. Chapter 5. The Most Convincing Lie. Your brain tells you, here's the deception that keeps smart people stuck longer than anything else. Your brain tells you that all that spinning, cycling, analyzing, and rehearsing is productive, that it's responsible, that it's what careful, intelligent, thoughtful people do before making important decisions. And the truly insidious thing about this lie is how convincing it feels from the inside. When you're deep in an overthinking spiral, you don't feel stuck. You feel engaged. You feel like you're doing the work. You feel like each new angle you consider, each new variable you introduce, each new scenario you simulate is bringing you closer to the right answer. You feel like you're being thorough, rigorous, and responsible. You are not. You are procrastinating in the most sophisticated costume imaginable. Here's what the research actually shows consistently across multiple fields and methodologies. Excessive deliberation leads to worse outcomes, not better ones, not slightly worse, not marginally diminished, often substantially worse. People who trust their initial instincts and act on them, with modest, focused consideration rather than exhaustive analysis, generally make better decisions than people who deliberate at length before committing. Why does this happen? Because thinking about doing something and actually doing it activate completely different parts of your brain, and those parts are not interchangeable. Think about learning to drive. In the beginning, you thought consciously about every single element: mirror check, signal, shoulder check, steering wheel position, brake pressure, gap in traffic. It was exhausting and slow, but eventually, after enough repetition, your brain transferred the entire skill to a different system, one that runs automatically, below conscious awareness, freeing up your conscious mind to do other things. The same principle operates in almost every domain. Your conscious, analytical mind, the one doing all the worrying, is actually the slow, limited system. It's sequential. It can only hold a few variables at once. It's vulnerable to fatigue, anxiety, and the distorting effects of too much information. Your intuitive, experiential mind, the one that fires in the first few seconds, is drawing on your entire lifetime of accumulated pattern recognition. It's parallel. It's fast. It's remarkably accurate for complex, multivariable situations, precisely because it isn't trying to consciously process everything simultaneously. When you override your intuition with extended analysis, you're not upgrading your decision. You're frequently downgrading it. This doesn't mean never thinking. It means understanding the difference between thinking that leads somewhere and thinking that goes in circles. Productive thinking is directional. It moves. It asks specific questions. What's the one thing I need to know to feel confident here? What's the actual first step? What would make this decision clearly wrong? It generates momentum. Unproductive thinking is circular. It cycles back on itself. It asks impossible questions. How can I guarantee this will work? What if I'm making a massive mistake? What will people think if this goes wrong? It generates anxiety, not answers. And crucially, it generates the feeling of productivity without any of the substance. The business world is littered with examples of this. Teams that spent years perfecting a product based on theoretical market research, only to launch into a landscape that had completely shifted. Entrepreneurs who refined their business plan through 47 iterations, but never actually talked to a real customer. Companies that analyzed their competitors so thoroughly they forgot to build anything of their own. Meanwhile, the companies that launched quickly, imperfectly, messily, with obvious flaws and incomplete features, got real feedback. They learned what the market actually wanted versus what they theorized it wanted. They iterated. They improved. They built things people genuinely used. The thinking created beautiful, internally consistent plans. The doing created actual products. There's a psychological phenomenon behind the feeling of productive overthinking, and understanding it is genuinely liberating. It's called cognitive ease. When you've thought about something many times, it starts to feel familiar, and familiarity feels like understanding. Your brain interprets the smooth, effortless retrieval of thoughts you've already had as evidence that you deeply understand the situation. But familiarity is not the same as clarity. Rehearsed worry is not the same as genuine insight. The fact that a scenario feels well trodden in your mind doesn't mean you've actually learned anything new from traversing it for the 43rd time. There's also something worth understanding about the relationship between overthinking and perfectionism, because for most chronic overthinkers, these two are inseparable roommates. Perfectionism convinces you that there is a right answer to every question, a best path in every situation, an optimal choice hiding somewhere in the data, if you just look long enough and hard enough. And so, you keep looking, and the search never ends, because perfection is a horizon. It moves at exactly the pace you approach it. But here's what perfectionists rarely talk about, even privately. The endless pursuit of the perfect decision is often driven not by genuine desire for a great outcome, but by fear of criticism, fear of being wrong, fear of looking foolish, fear of having no one to blame but yourself if things go sideways. Overthinking is, at its core, a sophisticated avoidance strategy. It lets you feel like you're working on something while actually protecting you from the vulnerability of committing to it. And the cost, the real daily compounding cost, is a life spent in preparation for a performance you never quite give. Real growth doesn't come from better planning. It comes from iteration, from trying, observing what happens, adjusting, and trying again. This cycle of action and feedback is the actual engine of improvement. It cannot be simulated in your head. It cannot be replaced by more research or more deliberation. It requires contact with reality, and reality only responds to action. Chapter 6. The 2-Minute Decision Rule. All right, here's where we stop diagnosing and start solving. I'm going to give you the single most effective tool I know for breaking the overthinking loop in real time. And I want to warn you up front, your brain is going to resist it. Not because it doesn't work, it works extraordinarily well, but because it's simple. And overthinkers have a complicated relationship with simple solutions. Simple feels like it must be missing something. Simple feels irresponsible. It isn't. Simple is exactly what makes this work. Here it is, the 2-minute decision rule. If a decision can be made with the information you currently have, and it won't produce irreversible, genuinely catastrophic consequences, you give yourself exactly 2 minutes to decide. Set a timer. Think through your options, and when that timer goes off, you decide. No extensions. No, just let me think about it a bit more. No negotiating with yourself for 5 more minutes. 2 minutes. Decision made. Move forward. Now let me explain why this isn't as reckless as it sounds. Because the science behind it is genuinely fascinating. Your brain operates on 2 decision-making systems that work in fundamentally different ways. Psychologists call them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, intuitive, automatic. It draws on pattern recognition, accumulated experience, and unconscious processing. It fires in seconds. It's the system that tells you almost instantly whether you trust someone, whether a situation feels off, whether an opportunity excites you or drains you. System 1 is processing far more information than you're consciously aware of. It's pulling from your entire history of lived experience to generate rapid, often remarkably accurate assessments. System 2 is slow, deliberate, analytical. It's the system that does long division, follows complex arguments, and weighs explicit pros and cons. It's what you use when you're consciously thinking something through step by step. System 2 is powerful, but it's also slow, energy-intensive, and limited in how many variables it can genuinely process at once. Here's the critical insight. Overthinking happens when System 2 takes over decisions that System 1 is actually better equipped to handle. Most of the decisions you're overthinking aren't complex analytical problems that require extensive System 2 processing. They're multivariable, pattern-rich, judgment-based decisions where your fast, intuitive system is the more sophisticated tool. By forcing endless System 2 deliberation, you're not improving the quality of the decision. You're introducing noise, doubt, and distortion into a process that was running more cleanly before you started interfering. The 2-minute rule forces you to rely more heavily on System 1. It creates a time constraint that short-circuits your brain's tendency to escalate small decisions into major productions. And here's the beautiful thing. It works not despite the pressure of the constraint, but because of it. When you know you have 2 minutes, your brain automatically does something smart. It filters. It strips away the noise and focuses on what actually matters. It stops trying to build a complete model of every possible future and starts evaluating based on present reality. It becomes ruthlessly efficient at identifying the key factors. 2 minutes sounds brief, but let's actually walk through what 2 minutes can accomplish. Should you apply for that position that's slightly above your current experience level? 2 minutes is more than enough to assess. Does the role genuinely interest you? Do you meet roughly 70% of the qualifications? Does the company align with your values? And is there meaningful upside if you get it? Apply. Should you reach out to that person you've been meaning to reconnect with? 2 minutes to consider. Do you genuinely value this relationship? Would they be glad to hear from you? And is there something specific and genuine you want to say? Send the message. Should you sign up for that class, that event, that experience that keeps pulling at you? 2 minutes to ask, does this align with something I care about? Can I realistically make this work logistically? And am I avoiding it out of genuine disinterest or just fear? Register. The 2-minute rule doesn't mean you never do any research. For significant decisions with real stakes, major financial commitments, career pivots, significant life changes, appropriate information gathering is genuinely useful. The rule applies to the final decision after you've done reasonable preparation. At that point, more time rarely changes your choice. It just deepens your anxiety about making it. There's another dimension to this rule that matters deeply, and it's the one that actually builds the muscle over time. Most decisions are reversible, far more reversible than your anxiety is telling you right now. You take a job and it's not the right fit. You find another job. You start a course and it's not what you expected. You stop and choose something else. You move somewhere new and you don't love it. You move again. You invest in something that underperforms. You adjust your portfolio. You reach out to someone and they don't respond. Your life continues completely intact. Your overthinking brain presents every decision as a permanent carving in stone, a door that can only be opened or closed once, forever. This is almost never accurate. Life is far more forgiving, far more flexible, and far more full of second chances than chronic anxiety makes it appear. The fear of making the wrong decision is almost always disproportionate to the actual consequences of that decision. And the cost of not deciding, the opportunity cost, the confidence cost, the compounding cost of standing still is almost always more expensive than the cost of an imperfect choice. Start with low-stakes decisions. The 2-minute rule with lunch orders, with weekend plans, with what to watch, with what to wear. Each time you make a quick decision and the world doesn't end, and it won't, you're building evidence against the story your anxiety has been telling you. You're proving to yourself, one small decision at a time, that your instincts are trustworthy, that quick choices don't lead to disaster, that you are, in fact, more than capable of navigating whatever comes from a reasonable decision made with incomplete information. Because here's the truth that changes everything. You cannot make progress while you're standing still. And every moment spent overthinking is a moment of standing still, dressed up as movement. The timer is waiting. Start it. Chapter 7. The 80% Rule. Good enough is actually great. Let's talk about perfectionism's favorite hiding place. It doesn't always show up as obsessive tidiness or impossibly high standards. Sometimes, most of the time actually, for the kind of person reading something like this, perfectionism hides inside decision-making. It disguises itself as thoroughness, as diligence, as the responsible desire to get things right before committing. And it whispers the same thing over and over in every situation, just a little more information, and then you'll be ready. You never are, because the information never runs out, and ready never arrives. The 80% rule exists to break this spell. Here's the principle in plain language. Make your decision when you have 80% of the information you think you need and you feel 80% confident in your direction. Don't wait for complete certainty. Don't hold out for the perfect data set. Don't demand guarantees from a universe that doesn't offer them. Act at 80%, adjust as you go. Now, I know what your brain just did. It flagged this immediately. But what about the other 20%? What if that last 20% is the critical piece I'm missing? Here's the honest answer. It almost never is. Research on information and decision quality consistently shows something that's both liberating and slightly humbling. The relationship between more information and better decisions follows a steep curve of diminishing returns. The first chunk of research you do, let's say the first 20 to 30% of everything you could possibly learn about a topic, delivers roughly 80% of the genuinely decision-relevant insight. Everything after that produces marginally less and less useful information while consuming the same amount of time and energy. That last 20% you're desperately hunting for, it typically introduces complexity more than clarity. It surfaces edge cases and exceptions that apply to almost no one. It gives your anxiety new material to work with rather than giving your judgment new insight to act on. Think about the last major purchase you researched extensively. The first hour probably taught you everything that actually mattered: price range, key features, reliability, and whether it fit your needs. Hours 2 through 10 were probably variations on the same information, presented differently, with diminishing marginal value and increasing marginal confusion. The 80% rule isn't carelessness. It's an accurate understanding of how information actually works. Military commanders have understood this for generations. In high-stakes, time-sensitive environments where waiting for perfect intelligence can mean the difference between achieving an objective and losing the moment entirely. Experienced leaders have long operated on the principle of acting decisively with sufficient, not complete, information. The underlying insight, the speed of a good decision often matters more than the quality of a perfect one that arrives too late. The business world applies the same logic in a different vocabulary. Leaders who built companies capable of moving fast and adapting in real time have talked explicitly about making decisions at 70 or 80% confidence rather than waiting for certainty that never comes. The ability to commit to a direction, execute with full energy, and adjust based on what actually happens, rather than what you theorized would happen, is one of the clearest differentiators between organizations that grow and organizations that stagnate inside endless planning cycles. The principle that makes this possible is one that overthinkers find genuinely uncomfortable to accept. You can course correct. This sounds obvious when you say it out loud. Of course you can course correct. Almost nothing in life is permanently irreversible. And yet, the way overthinkers approach decisions, you would think every choice is a one-way door into a locked room with no windows, a permanent, unchangeable commitment to a single path forever. It isn't. Almost nothing is. You take a job at 80% certainty, it's the right move. 3 months in, new information emerges about the culture, the leadership, the actual day-to-day reality. You adjust. Maybe you lean in differently. Maybe you start exploring alternatives. Maybe you discover it's even better than you thought. But you're learning. You're generating real feedback from real experience. That feedback is incomparably more valuable than anything you could have produced by spending 3 more weeks deliberating before accepting. Consider how this applies to the career decisions so many people overthink to the point of paralysis. There's a version of the career search that goes like this: spend months, sometimes years, researching every possible field, reading about every potential path, consuming content about what various careers feel like from the inside, trying to build enough information from the outside to make a decision that can only really be understood from the inside, waiting until the picture is complete enough to commit. And there's another version. Identify a direction that genuinely interests you and meets your core criteria at 80% confidence. Take a concrete step toward it: a relevant course, a conversation with someone in the field, a project that builds the necessary skill. Learn from the contact with reality. Adjust your direction based on what you discover. Take the next step. The second person doesn't make a perfect decision up front. They make a good enough decision quickly, and then they learn the way to the right place. They arrive at clarity through experience rather than waiting for experience to be replaced by analysis. This is how almost every meaningful career trajectory actually works, by the way. Very few people map out a career at 22 and arrive at exactly that destination at 45. Most great careers are built through iteration, through doing, learning, adjusting, and doing again. The people who try to figure it all out before starting are the ones who are still figuring it out when the window closes. The 80% rule also has a profound effect on something you might not expect: your relationship with information itself. When you're operating under the assumption that you need complete information before deciding, you become a passive, anxious consumer of information, always taking in, rarely processing into action. Information piles up. It accumulates. It creates the cognitive equivalent of a cluttered room where you can no longer find what you need because there's too much of everything. When you operate at 80%, you become an active curator of information. You gather with intention and direction. You ask focused questions rather than open-ended ones. You stop when you have what you need rather than when you've exhausted every source. And because you're acting regularly and generating real feedback, the information you receive from reality is infinitely richer and more accurate than anything you could have gathered through research alone. Here's a practical way to implement this immediately. Before you begin researching any significant decision, define in advance what 80% confident would look like for you in this specific situation. What are the 3 to 5 questions you actually need answered? What would make you feel sufficiently, not perfectly, informed? What are the concrete criteria your choice needs to meet? Write them down. Then research until those specific questions are answered and those specific criteria are assessed. Then stop. Then decide. This sounds almost too straightforward. That's because it is. The complicated version, the one where you keep researching indefinitely until some vague internal feeling of certainty arrives, that's the trap. The straightforward version is the exit. Your 80% decision won't be perfect. It will be real. It will generate experience. It will teach you things no amount of additional research could have. And almost always, not sometimes, but almost always, it will be enough. Enough to move. Enough to learn. Enough to build something that eventually becomes exactly what you were hoping for when you were still standing still, waiting for perfect clarity that was never going to come. Chapter 8. Decision deadlines that actually work. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. Most of the decisions you've been putting off don't feel like avoidance. They feel like ongoing consideration. You tell yourself you're still thinking it through, still weighing the options, still gathering a bit more information. The story you're telling yourself is one of careful, responsible deliberation. But there's a simpler word for open-ended deliberation with no defined endpoint: avoidance. And the reason you can sustain it without recognizing it as such is that there's no deadline forcing the truth into the open. Without a real, firm, externally anchored deadline, your brain has no reason to stop considering and start committing. It can stay in the comfortable gray zone of still deciding indefinitely, which is exactly what it will do if you let it. Decision deadlines cut through this with surgical precision. But, and this matters enormously, not all deadlines work equally. Most people who try to set their own decision deadlines find that their brains simply don't take them seriously. The deadline arrives, nothing happens, and a new deadline gets set, equally ignored. For a deadline to actually work, it needs specific qualities, that engage your psychology rather than just your calendar. Let's go through them one by one. First, effective deadlines are tied to external consequences, not just internal intentions. There's a fundamental difference between telling yourself, I'll decide about this by Thursday, and a situation where Thursday is when the early registration discount expires, or when the job offer expires, or when the apartment gets listed publicly. Your brain knows the difference immediately. Internal intentions can be renegotiated. External consequences cannot. This is why marketing that creates genuine scarcity, real limited availability, real expiring offers works so effectively on even highly analytical people. It's not manipulation in those cases. It's your brain correctly recognizing that the window is actually closing and that continued deliberation has a real cost. You can engineer this same urgency for your own decisions. Considering a course? Register before the early deadline closes. Thinking about applying for a position? Submit before the application window ends. Deciding whether to join a group, an event, a program? Book before the registration cutoff. These aren't tricks. They're structures that work with your psychology instead of against it. Second, effective deadlines are calibrated to the genuine complexity of the decision. One of the common mistakes people make when they try to use decision deadlines is applying a uniform time frame to everything, which either rushes decisions that legitimately benefit from more consideration or gives overthinking decisions far more time than they need. A general guideline that works well for most personal decisions. Minor choices get minutes to hours. Significant personal decisions get 1 to 3 days. Major life decisions, significant financial commitments, career transitions, relationship pivots get 1 to 2 weeks maximum. Notice that even at the high end, we're talking about 2 weeks, not 2 months, not until I feel completely sure. 2 weeks? Because here's what 2 months of continued deliberation on a major decision typically produces. Not clarity, but an increasingly anxious, increasingly paralyzed person surrounded by an increasingly large pile of information they've lost the ability to process clearly. Calibrate to complexity, but always set a date. Always. Third, effective deadlines include predetermined trigger points that move you automatically from research mode to decision mode. This is the element most people miss, and it's the one that makes the difference between a deadline that works and one that just gets pushed. Before you start your deliberation period, define exactly what enough looks like. Not vaguely, specifically. I will spend 4 hours researching this option and 2 hours talking to people who've done something similar. When those 6 hours are complete, I will decide. Or I will make a list of my top 5 criteria and assess each option against them. When that assessment is done, I will choose the option with the highest score. These trigger points remove the subjectivity from the transition between deliberating and deciding. Your brain can't keep moving the goalposts because you've already defined where they are. When the conditions are met, the decision phase begins, regardless of whether you feel ready, because the feeling of readiness is something overthinkers wait for forever without ever actually experiencing. Fourth, effective deadlines involve external accountability. Tell someone. This is not a small thing. There is a substantial body of research confirming that public commitment dramatically increases follow-through. When you tell another person, a friend, a colleague, a mentor. When you will make this decision and what you'll communicate to them when you've made it, you've created an accountability structure that your brain takes far more seriously than a private intention. This doesn't need to be elaborate. A simple text message, "I've been going back and forth on this decision. I'm committing to deciding by Saturday. I'll let you know what I choose." That's it. That's enough to fundamentally change your relationship with the deadline. Fifth, effective deadlines include a predetermined consequence for missing them. This is the final piece, and it's more important than it sounds. Decide in advance. If I haven't made this decision by my deadline, what happens automatically? Maybe the default is that you go with the first option you considered, which research suggests was probably your best instinct anyway. Maybe the default is that you decline altogether and remove the decision from your plate. Maybe the default is that you ask someone you trust to make the call for you, and you commit to following their recommendation. The specific consequence matters less than having one, because what it does is fundamentally alter the cost-benefit calculation of continued avoidance. Right now, not deciding costs you almost nothing in the short term. It just postpones the discomfort. When not deciding has a real predetermined consequence, the calculus shifts. Deciding becomes the easier path, and that's exactly where you need it to be. There's one more technique worth mentioning for decisions that feel genuinely too large for a single deadline: graduated deadlines. Break the decision into phases. Phase 1. Gather the essential information I've identified as necessary. Deadline: 3 days. Phase 2. Narrow from all options to 2 or 3 finalists based on my core criteria. Deadline: 1 week. Phase 3. Make the final choice between the remaining options. Deadline: 10 days. This structure prevents the overwhelming sensation of trying to leap from complete uncertainty to complete commitment in one jump. Instead, you're making a series of smaller, more manageable commitments, each one feeding naturally into the next, each one reducing the complexity of the next decision. Forward momentum accumulates, and accumulated momentum makes the final decision not the hardest one you've ever made, but honestly, often the easiest, because by the time you get there, most of the decision has already made itself. Chapter 9. The Action-First Mindset. Everything changes when you flip the sequence. Most of us were taught, explicitly or implicitly, that the correct order of operations is think, plan, prepare, then act. Get clear first. Get ready first. Get confident first. Then move. This sounds logical. It feels responsible. And for a narrow category of decisions, surgery, structural engineering, nuclear physics, it's probably the right approach. For the vast majority of decisions in your actual life, it keeps you permanently, exquisitely stuck. Because for most meaningful things, career paths, creative projects, relationships, business ideas, personal growth, you cannot think your way to clarity. Clarity comes from contact with reality. And contact with reality requires action. Let me give you an image that captures this perfectly. You can read everything ever written about swimming. You can study the physics of water resistance and buoyancy. You can watch Olympic swimmers until you've memorized every detail of their technique. You can visualize yourself moving through the water with perfect form. You can do all of this with extraordinary thoroughness and dedication. And you will not know how to swim until you get in the water. Not because the reading and studying were worthless, They're genuinely useful context. But because swimming is a doing skill that can only be learned through doing, your body has to encounter the actual resistance of actual water and figure out in real time how to respond. Most of the things that matter most to you are doing skills, leadership, communication, creative expression, entrepreneurship, emotional intimacy. They can be informed by thinking. They can only be developed through action. The action-first mindset isn't about abandoning consideration entirely. It's about radically shortening the consideration phase and radically expanding the action phase. It's about asking a different question at the start of every decision process. Instead of, how can I be sure this will work before I begin? You ask, what is the smallest possible action I can take right now that will give me real information about whether this is the right direction? That question changes everything because it's answerable. It points to something concrete and doable. And crucially, it's humble about what thinking can achieve while being ambitious about what experience can teach. Here's how this works in practice across different domains. You've been thinking about changing careers. The traditional approach, research every possible field until you've narrowed down the right one, then figure out the required qualifications, then assess whether you meet them, then decide whether to pursue it. This process can take months and produce nothing but more confusion because all the research in the world can't tell you what it actually feels like to do a different kind of work every day. The action-first approach. Identify 2 or 3 directions that genuinely interest you and take the smallest action in each direction simultaneously. Have a real conversation with someone who does that work. Do a small freelance or volunteer project in that space. Take a focused short course to get actual exposure. These actions will teach you more in 3 weeks than 3 months of research could, because they're generating direct experience rather than theoretical understanding. You've been thinking about starting a creative project, writing, music, art, content, anything. The traditional approach. Plan it thoroughly first. Define your style, your audience, your structure, your workflow. Get clear on your direction before you create anything so you don't waste time going the wrong way. The action-first approach. Start before you're ready. Create something imperfect immediately, not because the planning is worthless, but because the creating will teach you things about your own style, your own voice, and your own direction that no amount of planning could reveal. Writers who write before they have a perfect outline consistently produce more and better work than writers who outline before they write, because the act of writing generates discovery that planning cannot replicate. You've been thinking about reaching out to someone, a potential mentor, a reconnected friend, someone whose work you admire. You've been drafting the message in your head, trying to find exactly the right words, the right tone, the right moment. Weeks pass. The action-first approach. Send something imperfect today. Not careless, genuine, but imperfect. Because the perfect message you're crafting in your head will never arrive, and the imperfect, genuine message you send today might change everything. There's a psychological mechanism that makes the action-first mindset particularly powerful beyond just the practical benefits. Psychologists call it implementation intention, the phenomenon where committing to a specific action at a specific time dramatically increases the probability that you follow through, while also making you measurably more likely to notice and utilize resources that support that action. When you commit to doing something concrete, not just intending to do it someday, but actually scheduling a specific action, your brain shifts modes. It goes from passively processing information about the topic to actively scanning your environment for opportunities, resources, and connections relevant to what you've committed to. People start appearing who can help. Information surfaces that's directly applicable. Possibilities become visible that were invisible when you were still in deliberation mode. This isn't mystical. It's attentional. Your brain has limited attention bandwidth, and what you're actively pursuing shapes what you notice. Action commitments direct that attention in ways that passive consideration never does. One practical technique for building the action-first mindset is what I think of as micro-commitments, instead of trying to make a massive commitment that triggers all your resistance. I'm going to completely change my career starting Monday. Make a commitment so small it feels almost trivially easy. I will spend 20 minutes this week having coffee with someone who works in a field I'm curious about. I will write 1 page today. Not a chapter, not a polished draft. 1 page. I will send 1 email to 1 person I've been meaning to reach out to. I will attend 1 event, 1 class, 1 meeting that moves me in the direction I keep thinking about. These micro-commitments are powerful precisely because they're small. They don't trigger resistance. They don't require a complete life overhaul. They just require motion. A small, manageable, real step in a direction that matters. And motion begets motion. The first micro-commitment makes the second one easier. The second makes the third easier still. Before long, you've built momentum through a series of actions that each felt almost too small to matter. Compound interest doesn't require large individual deposits. It requires consistent ones. The action-first mindset also transforms your relationship with failure in a way that's genuinely liberating. When you're in deliberation mode, failure is the thing you're trying to prevent through more analysis. It looms large. It represents confirmation of your fears, evidence that you were right to be cautious, proof that you should have thought longer and harder. When you're in action mode, failure becomes something different. It becomes data. It becomes a lesson that cost you some time and effort, but gave you something infinitely valuable in return. Specific, accurate information about what doesn't work, delivered directly by reality, unavailable through any other means. Failing fast and learning fast is categorically superior to thinking long and learning nothing. The people who build things, companies, relationships, creative bodies of work, athletic capability, meaningful expertise, are almost never the people who thought the longest before starting. They're the people who started before they felt ready, adjusted based on what they discovered, and kept going. They're not smarter than you. They're not braver in some inherent fixed way. They've just learned to trust action over analysis, experience over preparation, reality over rehearsal. And that trust, it's learnable, it's buildable, one small imperfect action at a time. Chapter 10. Emergency Protocols for Overthinking Attacks. You're going to have them, even after everything you've read so far, even after you've genuinely committed to changing the pattern, even after you've started building new habits and experiencing the relief that comes with decisive action. You're going to have moments where the old machinery fires back up with full force. Your mind will start racing. Your chest will tighten, the scenarios will multiply, the variables will stack, And within minutes, you'll find yourself back in the familiar feeling of being completely overwhelmed by something your calmer self would handle in 30 seconds. These are overthinking attacks, and they're not a sign that you're failing or backsliding or fundamentally incapable of change. They're a sign that you're human, with a brain that has deeply grooved patterns built over years of repetition. Even the most decisive people on the planet have moments of mental overload. The difference is that they have something ready for when it happens. So do you after this chapter. The first thing you need is recognition. This sounds obvious, but it's genuinely the most important step, and the one most people skip. When you're in the middle of an overthinking attack, it doesn't feel like overthinking. It feels like important, urgent thinking that demands your immediate full attention. Your brain presents the spiral as necessary, as responsible, as the only rational response to a genuinely complex situation. You have to learn to recognize the physical and mental signatures before the spiral gets too deep to interrupt easily. The signs are consistent across most people. Your heart rate subtly increases while you're sitting still. Your thoughts are jumping between scenarios rather than moving linearly toward resolution. You feel a low-grade sense of dread that's difficult to attach to any single specific concern. Your body is tense in ways you didn't consciously notice until just now. You've been researching, reading, or revisiting the same information repeatedly without it producing any new clarity. And perhaps most tellingly, the thinking is generating more questions than answers. That last one is the clearest signal. Productive thinking narrows. Overthinking expands. If every minute of deliberation is producing new concerns rather than reducing existing ones, you're not thinking your way toward a decision. You're fueling a spiral. The moment you recognize it, the very moment, is when you deploy the protocol. Not after 5 more minutes. Not after you've just finished this one last thing. Immediately. Protocol 1, the circuit breaker. 3 steps. Simple enough to remember even when your brain is flooded. Stop. Breathe. Ground. Stop means literally interrupting the thought, saying the word internally or out loud, creating a moment of deliberate discontinuity in the mental loop. It sounds almost absurdly simple, but the act of naming what's happening shifts you from being inside the spiral to observing it from a slight distance. That distance is everything. Breathe means 5 slow, deliberate breaths with your full attention on the physical sensation of air moving in and out. Not thinking about breathing, actually feeling it. The coolness at the nostrils, the expansion of the chest, the release on the exhale. This isn't decorative advice. Slow, controlled breathing directly activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the branch of your autonomic nervous system responsible for the rest and digest response. It physiologically counteracts the cortisol and adrenaline flooding your system. You are chemically interrupting the stress response through breath. Ground means engaging your senses in the immediate present environment. Look around and name 5 things you can see. Not abstract things, concrete physical objects in front of you right now. 4 things you can physically touch. 3 things you can hear. 2 things you can smell. 1 thing you can taste. This technique, known in clinical practice as the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding method, works because your brain cannot simultaneously maintain abstract future-oriented anxiety and concrete present-moment sensory engagement. You're literally redirecting neural resources away from the overthinking regions and toward perceptual processing. The entire circuit breaker takes about 3 minutes, and after it, you will be meaningfully calmer and meaningfully clearer than you were before. Protocol 2. The two-question filter. Once you've broken the immediate spiral with the circuit breaker, you need a way to assess whether your concern is proportionate to reality. 2 questions do this job efficiently. Question 1. What is the worst realistic outcome if I make a reasonable decision with the information I currently have? Not the worst imaginable outcome, the worst realistic one. This distinction is crucial because overthinking brains specialize in escalating from realistic to catastrophic without announcing the transition. When you force yourself to name the actual worst realistic scenario, you usually discover that it's considerably less devastating than the formless dread you've been carrying. Question 2. What is the actual cost of continuing to not decide? This question is the one overthinkers almost never ask themselves because the cost of inaction feels invisible compared to the cost of action. But it's never actually invisible. It's just unexamined. When you make it explicit, when you name the time being consumed, the opportunity being lost, the energy being drained, the stress being sustained, the cost of inaction suddenly becomes very concrete and very often considerably higher than the cost of an imperfect decision. These 2 questions together shift your frame from how do I guarantee a perfect outcome to what is the actually sensible thing to do given real trade-offs. That's a frame your brain can work with. The first frame is impossible to satisfy. The second is entirely manageable. Protocol 3. The constraint method. When you're paralyzed by too many options or too many variables, the answer is almost never more analysis. The answer is artificial reduction of complexity. Pick a constraint, any reasonable constraint, and apply it ruthlessly. You're overwhelmed choosing between career paths. Limit yourself to considering only 3, the ones that resonate most immediately. You're paralyzed about investment options. Narrow to 2. You're spiraling about a major life decision with seemingly infinite implications. Identify the single most important criterion, the one factor that matters more than any other, and let that criterion make the first cut. Constraints feel like limitations. They're actually liberation. They give your brain a manageable scope within which it can actually function effectively rather than an infinite scope within which it freezes entirely. And here's the thing worth remembering. The constraint isn't permanent. Once you've decided within the constraint, you can always expand back out if the situation genuinely calls for it. But 90% of the time, the decision made within the constraint is just as good as any decision you would have made after another 3 weeks of exhaustive analysis. Protocol 4. The 10-minute capture. Set a timer for 10 minutes. During that time, write down everything, every concern, every variable, every possible outcome, every fear that's swirling in your mental loop. Don't organize it. Don't analyze it. Don't try to solve any of it. Just capture it, get it out of your head and onto paper. 2 things happen through this process that are genuinely useful. First, your brain experiences something called cognitive offloading. When your working memory is holding dozens of concerns simultaneously, it's overwhelmed and fragmented. When those concerns are externalized, written down, visible, finite, Your brain can stop working so hard to maintain them in active memory. The anxiety decreases simply because the information is now somewhere it doesn't have to hold anymore. Second, you almost always discover that the catastrophic, overwhelming tangle of concerns that felt endless inside your head is actually a finite, manageable list on paper. The formless dread that seemed boundless has edges. It has a beginning and an end. Problems with edges are problems you can work with. When the timer goes off, look at your list, pick the most actionable item, and take one small step toward addressing it. Not the whole thing, one step. Forward motion from analysis paralysis always starts with one small concrete action. Protocol 5, the outside perspective. When you're deep inside an overthinking spiral, you have lost perspective on your own situation. This is not a character flaw. It's the nature of being human and emotionally involved in your own life. You cannot objectively assess a situation you're subjectively inside of. So borrow someone else's perspective. But here's the specific, important way to do this. Don't ask for more analysis. Don't present your situation and ask someone to help you think through all the angles. You already have too many angles. What you need is a gut reaction. Ask, if you were in my exact situation, what would you do? Or, what's your immediate, honest impression of this? Or even just, does this seem as complicated to you as it does to me? Fresh eyes cut through mental fog with a speed that's genuinely startling. Someone who hasn't been inside your spiral for 2 weeks can often see the obvious answer in 30 seconds. Not because they're smarter, but because they're not carrying the accumulated anxiety you've been loading onto the decision with every passing day. Protocol 6. The deadline declaration. When you catch yourself in a loop with no visible exit, impose a deadline publicly and immediately. Tell someone, right now, before you can talk yourself out of it, exactly when you will decide. Make the window short, 24 to 48 hours, for most personal decisions. Then treat that deadline with the seriousness of an external obligation. The act of public commitment changes the psychological weight of the deadline. It's no longer just an intention you've made to yourself, which your brain knows you can quietly renegotiate without consequence. It becomes a social commitment, something that has a cost if you don't follow through. And your brain, which is exquisitely sensitive to social consequences, takes that cost seriously in a way it doesn't take internal intentions seriously. Protocol 7. The energy redirect. Sometimes the most effective thing you can do in the middle of an overthinking attack is move your body. Not because physical movement directly solves the decision in front of you, but because overthinking is a state of high arousal with no physical outlet. Your stress hormones are activated, your nervous system is running hot, and all of that energy has nowhere to go. It just cycles back through the mental loop. Physical movement provides the outlet, a brisk walk, a few minutes of movement, cleaning something, organizing your space, any physical activity that requires enough presence and coordination to pull your attention away from the abstract mental spiral. The movement burns off cortisol. The repetitive physical task often has a meditative quality that quiets the noise. And the simple act of completing something physical, however small, restores a sense of agency and control that anxiety systematically erodes. You will return to the decision afterward with a quieter mind and a clearer perspective, almost without exception. Chapter 11. Retraining your decision-making muscles. Here's something important to understand about where you are right now. Reading all of this, understanding the neuroscience, recognizing the patterns, having the protocols, that's valuable, genuinely. But understanding is not the same as capability, and capability in any domain that matters is built through practice, through repetition, through progressive challenge over time. Your decision-making ability is exactly like a physical muscle that's been underused. Not broken, underused. And the path from underused to strong runs through consistent progressive exercise, not through more reading, more understanding, or more preparation for the exercise. Through the exercise itself. Exercise 1. Decision sprints. Set a timer for 5 minutes. During those 5 minutes, make 20 small decisions as quickly as possible. What to have for breakfast tomorrow? Which item of clothing to donate? Which book to pick up next? Which route to take somewhere this week? Which friend to reach out to? What to cook for dinner tonight? The decisions themselves don't matter. The speed is the entire point. You are not trying to make optimal choices. You are building the neural pathways that support quick, instinct-based decision-making. Each rapid decision is a small repetition that reinforces your brain's capacity to process, filter, and commit without extended deliberation. Like doing a set of quick repetitions to build muscle speed and coordination. The individual movement is light, but the cumulative neurological effect is real. Start with decisions that have minimal consequences. When the outcome of a wrong choice is negligible, your anxiety about making a quick choice is also negligible. This low-stakes environment is exactly where you want to begin building the pattern, before gradually applying the same decisiveness to situations where the stakes feel higher. Exercise 2. Option elimination training. Instead of trying to identify the best option from a set of choices which requires predicting future satisfaction and involves enormous uncertainty, practice the easier cognitive task of eliminating the worst options until only a reasonable choice remains. You're choosing a restaurant. Eliminate cuisines you're genuinely not in the mood for. Eliminate places that are logistically inconvenient right now. Eliminate places with consistently poor reviews on the specific things you care about. What's left is your answer. Elimination is psychologically easier than selection for a specific reason. When you're eliminating, you're focused on what you don't want, which is usually considerably clearer than what you do want. Selection requires building a positive vision of future satisfaction. Elimination requires only identifying present moment incompatibilities. It uses simpler, faster cognitive machinery. Once you've practiced this with small decisions until it becomes fluid, you'll find it works remarkably well for larger ones too. Most complex decisions become significantly simpler when you approach them as elimination rather than selection. Exercise 3. Gut check. Tracking. For 1 month, before making any significant decision, write down your immediate gut reaction, your very first instinct before any conscious analysis begins. Then make your decision through whatever process you normally use. Then record the outcome. At the end of the month, compare. How often was your gut reaction aligned with the decision you ultimately made? How often did extensive analysis lead you away from your initial instinct? And in cases where you diverged from your gut, how did those outcomes compare to cases where you followed it? Most people who do this exercise are genuinely surprised by what they find. The data, accumulated over a month of real decisions, consistently shows that initial instincts are more accurate than extended deliberation for most types of decisions most people actually face. This evidence-based insight is far more convincing than any abstract argument I could make, because it's your data, from your decisions, in your actual life, and it builds a kind of trust in your own instincts that no amount of external encouragement can manufacture. Exercise 4. Progressive deadline compression. Identify a category of decision you consistently overthink. Social plans, weekend activities, work-related choices, whatever your specific pattern is, establish your current typical deliberation time for that category of decision. Then commit to systematically reducing it. If you currently spend an hour deciding whether to attend a social event, compress to 30 minutes next time, then 15, then 5, then 1. The decision itself doesn't change. The quality of the outcome doesn't meaningfully change. But your brain's capacity for efficient decision-making in that category develops through the progressive reduction. This is exactly how any form of progressive training works. You apply a manageable challenge, adapt to it, then increase the challenge slightly. Over time, what felt difficult becomes automatic. What felt automatic becomes effortless. Exercise 5. Decision momentum. Clustering. This one is subtle but powerful. Decisive action is a state, not just an individual choice. When you make one quick decision and follow through, you're in a psychologically activated state where making the next quick decision is easier. Action begets action. Momentum compounds. Practice deliberately clustering your decisions during periods when you're already in a decisive state. When you've just completed something, made a good call, or taken a strong action, immediately use that momentum to make another decision you've been sitting on. Ride the wave of your own psychological activation. The reverse is also true and worth understanding. When you're in analysis paralysis mode, each additional decision you try to make from that state becomes harder. Avoidance begets avoidance. This is why some days feel like you simply cannot make any decisions at all. You've entered a state where the machinery is in the wrong gear, and every attempt to decide reinforces the gridlock. The exit from that state is almost never more deliberation. It's one small, fast, decisive action about anything, even something trivially low stakes, that breaks the state and shifts you into a different gear. Exercise 6. Decision documentation. Keep a simple log. For every significant decision you make using these new approaches, note the method you used, the time it took, and the outcome after a week, a month, 3 months. Don't filter or edit the log to look good. Record honestly. What this creates over time is something invaluable. A personal evidence base. A record of your own decision-making history that you can actually reference when anxiety tells you that quick decisions are dangerous, that you can't trust your instincts, that you need more time and more information. Your log will tell you the truth, and the truth, based on the consistent experience of people who do this, is almost always more encouraging than the story anxiety has been telling you. Your quick decisions produce good outcomes more often than you think. Your instincts are more reliable than your doubt suggests. And the time you spent deliberating on the decisions that turned out well rarely made any meaningful difference to the outcome. That's not a theory. For you, after a few months of documentation. It will be documented fact. Chapter 12, The Art of Strategic Ignorance. Here's a concept that will feel counterintuitive at first, especially if you've built your identity partly around being someone who's informed, thorough, and intellectually engaged. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for your decision-making is deliberately choose not to seek more information, not because information is bad, not because research is worthless, but because there is a point, a specific, identifiable point, beyond which additional information stops improving your decisions and starts actively degrading them. And most chronic overthinkers crossed that point a long time ago on most of the decisions they're currently agonizing over. Strategic ignorance is the conscious, deliberate practice of limiting your information intake to what's genuinely decision-relevant and resisting the pull to gather more beyond that point. Think about how a skilled athlete performs under genuine pressure. A tennis player returning a fast serve doesn't consciously process the server's body position, the racket angle, the spin direction, the wind conditions, the crowd noise, the score implications, the full tactical context of the match. They process a small number of critical signals and respond. Everything else is strategically ignored, not because it doesn't exist, but because attending to it would slow the response and degrade the performance. The same principle applies to decisions. You don't need to know everything. You need to know the right things. And the right things are almost always considerably fewer than you think they are. Here's the distinction that makes strategic ignorance practical. Decision-changing information versus curiosity, satisfying information. Decision-changing information directly impacts which option you would choose. If you're evaluating a job offer and you learn that the role has a 6-month mandatory travel requirement you weren't told about, that changes your decision. That's decision-changing information, and it matters. Curiosity-satisfying information is interesting, possibly fascinating, but doesn't actually alter which option is right for you. Reading the company founder's detailed backstory, investigating whether the office has natural light, comparing this offer to offers you're not actually receiving. This information keeps you feeling productively engaged without moving you any closer to a decision. It satisfies the urge to research without serving the purpose of research. The practical tool for distinguishing between them is what I call the 3-question filter. Before pursuing any piece of information, ask yourself 3 things. Will knowing this actually change which option I choose? Do I genuinely need this to decide, or do I just want it because gathering information feels productive? Do I already have enough to make a reasonable decision? If the honest answer to the first question is no, stop there. If the honest answer to the third question is yes, stop there too. The information doesn't need to be gathered just because it exists. This filter, applied consistently, reduces your research time dramatically, often by 50 to 70%, without any meaningful reduction in decision quality. Because the information you're filtering out wasn't improving your decisions. It was just filling time and feeding anxiety with new material. Information budgeting takes this one step further. Before beginning any research process, define your budget in advance. How much time you will spend, which specific sources you will consult, and which specific questions you need answered. When the budget is exhausted, when you've hit the time limit, consulted those sources and answered those questions, You stop. You decide with what you have. This eliminates the endless open-ended research mode that characterizes overthinking. Your brain can't keep expanding the scope because the scope is predefined, and predefined scope has a natural endpoint. Natural endpoints produce decisions. There's a specific category of information that deserves particular attention here, and it's one that causes an extraordinary amount of unnecessary suffering for thoughtful, self-aware people. Other people's opinions about your decisions. Social media has created a bizarre dynamic where it's now technically possible to crowdsource opinions from hundreds of people before making almost any personal decision. And it feels useful. More perspectives, more angles, more information. Surely that produces better decisions. It doesn't. It produces paralysis. Here's why. The opinions you solicit from your broader network are not calibrated to your specific situation, your specific values, your specific priorities, or your specific life circumstances. They're calibrated to the opener's own experience, their own projections, their own fears and hopes, and frequently their own need to feel helpful. The result is not a clearer picture of your situation. It's a chaotic collage of other people's perspectives, many of them contradictory, none of them truly informed about what matters most to you. Strategic ignorance here means being extremely selective about whose input you actually seek. Not 0 people, but 2 or 3 people at most, chosen specifically because they know you well, have relevant experience, and are genuinely invested in your well-being rather than just interested in giving advice. Everyone else's opinion? Strategically ignored. Not rudely, not dismissively, just not sought in the first place. There's one more application of strategic ignorance worth emphasizing, because it's the one most people struggle with most. Ignoring information about decisions you've already made. The moment a decision is made, a job accepted, a purchase completed, a commitment entered into, the single most useful thing you can do for your own well-being is stop gathering new information that might make you second-guess it. Stop reading reviews of the product after you've bought it. Stop researching alternative vacation destinations after you've booked. Stop reading about the company culture after you've accepted the offer. This information cannot help you. The decision is made. All that post-decision information consumption can produce is regret, doubt, and the corrosive sense that you chose wrong, which may not even be true, but will feel increasingly true the more you expose yourself to alternatives you didn't choose. Strategic ignorance after a decision is an act of self-respect. It says, I made the best choice I could with what I had. I'm committing to it fully. Reality will tell me what I need to know from here. That commitment, that willingness to give your own decisions a fair chance before subjecting them to retrospective second-guessing, is one of the most underrated elements of genuinely good decision-making. Mastering strategic ignorance transforms you from a passive, anxious consumer of infinite information into a focused, intentional curator of exactly what you need. You become selective about what enters your mind the way a careful editor is selective about what enters a publication. Not everything makes the cut, and the publication is better for it. Chapter 13. Building Unshakable Decision. Confidence. Let's be honest about something most personal development content gets wrong. The goal of overcoming overthinking isn't to become someone who never doubts. It isn't to achieve a permanent state of breezy, effortless certainty about every choice you face, that's not a real destination. And chasing it is just another form of perfectionism wearing different clothes. The real goal is something more grounded and considerably more attainable, to develop such deep trust in your ability to handle whatever comes from your decisions that the fear of making the wrong one loses its power over you. That's unshakable decision confidence, and it's built very differently from the confidence most people try to manufacture. Most people try to build decision confidence by eliminating uncertainty, by researching until they feel sure, by planning until they feel prepared, by waiting until they feel ready. The problem with this approach is fundamental. Uncertainty cannot be eliminated. Readiness, for overthinkers, almost never arrives. And confidence built on the illusion of certainty is the most fragile kind. It shatters the moment reality diverges from the plan, which it always does eventually. Real decision confidence isn't built on certainty about outcomes. It's built on certainty about yourself, specifically on your proven ability to navigate, adapt, and recover from whatever outcomes actually arrive. Psychologists call this self-efficacy, the belief in your own capability to handle challenges through your own actions. And crucially, self-efficacy isn't built through thinking about your capabilities. It's built through using them. Every time you make a decision and successfully navigate what follows, including when what follows isn't what you hoped, you add a deposit to your self-efficacy account. Every time you avoid deciding, you make a withdrawal. This is why the exercises in the previous chapter matter beyond their immediate practical effects. They're not just techniques for making faster choices. They're self-efficacy builders. Each quick decision that you survive, and you always survive, is evidence against the story your anxiety tells you about what happens when you don't analyze long enough. The first pillar of unshakable confidence is reframing your relationship with failure. Right now, if you're a chronic overthinker, failure likely feels like a verdict, evidence of poor judgment, confirmation of the fear that you're not equipped to navigate uncertainty effectively. And so you avoid it through endless analysis, through waiting, through staying safely in the planning phase where failure can't reach you. But here's what failure actually is for anyone paying honest attention. It's the most efficient teacher available. It delivers specific, accurate, immediately applicable information about what doesn't work in your specific situation, information that no amount of research or deliberation could have produced, because it could only come from actual contact with actual reality. Start documenting your failures alongside your successes, not to flagellate yourself, to learn from them. What did this teach you that you didn't know before? What did it reveal about what actually matters to you? What unexpected doors did it push you toward that you wouldn't have found on the original path? You will almost always find that your supposed failures contributed something real and valuable to where you eventually ended up. Not always immediately, not always comfortably, but looking back from a distance of months or years, the failures are almost never the disasters they felt like in the moment. They're chapters, sometimes uncomfortable ones, but necessary ones in the larger story. The second pillar is developing response flexibility. Confidence that's rigidly attached to one specific plan is confidence that breaks when circumstances change. And circumstances always change. True confidence is fluid. It comes not from having the perfect plan, but from having the demonstrated capacity to adapt when the plan meets reality and needs to evolve. This means building multiple pathways toward your goals rather than a single fragile route, multiple revenue approaches, multiple relationship building strategies, multiple ways to demonstrate value in your career. When you know you have options, not as a fallback that signals failure, but as an intentional part of how you navigate, the stakes of any single decision drop considerably. And when the stakes drop, the fear that fuels overthinking drops with them. The third pillar is outcome independence. This is perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated element of unshakable decision confidence, and it's worth sitting with carefully. Outcome independence means deriving your confidence and your sense of identity from the quality of your decision-making process rather than from any specific result. When you make a decision based on clear values, sound reasoning, and the best information reasonably available, and you make it with genuine commitment, that process deserves your respect, regardless of how the outcome unfolds. Outcomes are influenced by your decisions, but they're not solely determined by them. Markets shift. People respond in unexpected ways. Circumstances change. The exact same decision made by two different people in two slightly different contexts can produce entirely different outcomes. This means that judging the quality of your decisions purely by results is fundamentally inaccurate. What you can control completely is the quality of your process. And a good process, sustained over time, produces good outcomes in aggregate, even when individual results occasionally disappoint. This perspective is what allows genuinely confident people to make decisions and commit to them fully while remaining genuinely open to adjusting. When new information emerges, they're not emotionally attached to being right. They're committed to the process of deciding well and adapting honestly. The fourth pillar is temporal perspective. When you're inside a decision, it almost always feels more consequential than it actually is. The combination of present moment emotional intensity and the brain's negativity bias makes ordinary choices feel existential. The corrective is deliberately zooming out. Ask yourself honestly, will this decision matter in 10 years, in 5, in 1? For most of the choices that feel enormous right now, the honest answer is probably not much. The path you chose will have been one of several paths that could have worked. The outcome you were so worried about either didn't materialize or proved manageable when it did. This isn't dismissiveness about your genuine concerns. It's accuracy about proportionality. And proportionality is what your anxiety systematically distorts, restoring it, even briefly, even imperfectly, creates enough psychological space to decide from a calmer, clearer place. Chapter 14. Advanced Techniques for Complex Decisions. Not every decision yields to the 2-minute rule. Not every choice can be navigated with a quick gut check and a firm deadline. Some decisions genuinely involve significant stakes, multiple stakeholders, long time horizons, and real trade-offs between things you care about deeply. These decisions deserve more structured approaches, but structured doesn't mean endless. Even your most complex decisions benefit from frameworks that prevent overthinking while ensuring genuine consideration of what actually matters. The first technique is values-based decision architecture. Before evaluating any option in a complex decision, spend time clarifying what you actually value most in this specific domain of your life. Not what you think you should value. Not what would look good externally. What genuinely matters to you in ranked order for a career decision. Your top values might be creative autonomy, financial security, meaningful impact, flexibility, and continuous learning. For a relationship decision, they might be intellectual connection, shared ambition, emotional honesty, complementary energy, and mutual respect. For a major financial decision, they might be long-term security, current quality of life, risk tolerance, flexibility, and alignment with life goals. Once you've named your top 5 values in the relevant domain, score each option on a scale of 1 to 10 for how well it honors each value. Add the scores. The highest total isn't automatically your answer, but the process forces you to evaluate options against what you've explicitly stated matters most. Rather than getting lost in surface-level features and comparisons that may have nothing to do with your actual priorities. This technique regularly produces a clarifying surprise. You discover you've been agonizing over variables that don't actually rank highly among your real values while barely considering aspects that matter enormously. The architecture makes your own priorities visible to you in a way that unstructured deliberation rarely does. The second technique is the consultant method. Imagine you've been hired as a highly paid outside consultant to analyze this decision for someone else, someone whose situation you understand well but whose emotional involvement you don't share. What would you recommend based on the available information? This mental shift is surprisingly powerful. The consultant frame removes the perfectionism, the fear of regret, and the identity attachment that distort your thinking about your own decisions. Consultants are expected to make clear recommendations based on incomplete information within realistic time frames. They don't wait for certainty. They don't demand guarantees. They assess what's available, apply sound judgment, and advise decisively. You already have everything you need to do this for yourself. The consultant frame just gives your brain permission to use it without getting tangled in the emotional weight of personal consequence. The third technique is progressive commitment. For decisions that feel too large to make in one leap, major career transitions, significant relationship commitments, substantial financial moves, structure the decision as a series of smaller commitments rather than one enormous, irreversible choice. Each small commitment generates real experience and real feedback. Each step teaches you something that informs the next decision. And crucially, each step is reversible in a way that the full commitment might not be. You can stop at any point if what you're learning tells you this isn't the right direction. This approach transforms the paralysis-inducing question, should I completely commit to this enormous change, into the manageable question, should I take this specific, limited, low-risk next step? The answer to the second question is almost always clearer. And taking enough clear small steps eventually brings you to a place where the larger commitment is informed by genuine experience rather than speculation. The fourth technique is asymmetric risk analysis. For every significant option, ask 2 questions explicitly. What's the worst realistic outcome, and how would I actually recover from it? And what's the best realistic outcome, and how likely is it given what I know? This creates a simple framework for identifying what researchers call asymmetric opportunities, choices where the potential upside is substantially larger than the potential downside, and where the downside, even in the worst realistic case, is genuinely manageable. Most opportunities that overthinkers avoid indefinitely turn out, on honest analysis, to be asymmetric in exactly this way. The downside is real but recoverable. The upside is significant and meaningful. The fear is disproportionate to the actual risk profile. Seeing this clearly, in writing, explicitly analyzed, is often what finally tips a long-delayed decision into action. Not because the analysis guaranteed success, but because it accurately represented the actual trade-off rather than the catastrophized version anxiety had been presenting. Chapter 15. Living the Decisive Life. This is where everything lands. Not in a single technique, not in a framework or a protocol, in a way of moving through the world that's fundamentally different from the one you've been living. And that becomes more natural, more rewarding, and more distinctly yours the longer you practice it. Living decisively isn't a destination. It's a daily orientation, a default setting that you deliberately, consciously choose over and over again until it gradually stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like who you actually are. And here's what it looks like from the inside. You wake up and you don't spend 40 minutes in low-grade anxiety about everything. That needs to happen today. You make your first decision quickly, something small, something ordinary, and that small act of decisiveness sets a tone for the day that compounds forward. One quick decision makes the next one slightly easier. By midday, you're operating in a completely different cognitive register than the version of you that used to spend the first hour of every day mentally rehearsing every possible way things could go wrong. You encounter a problem at work, something unexpected, something you didn't plan for, and instead of spiraling into analysis about what this means and what all the implications are, you ask yourself one question. What's the most useful thing I can do in the next 30 minutes? Then you do that. Not perfectly, just usefully. And you course correct from there. Someone asks you to make a decision in a group setting. Where to go, what to do, which direction to take. And instead of deferring endlessly or hedging elaborately, you make a clear, genuine suggestion, not because you're certain it's optimal, because you'd rather move the group forward with a reasonable choice than hold everyone in place while perfection is pursued. People notice this. They appreciate it more than you might expect. You face a genuinely significant decision, the kind that would have previously consumed weeks of mental energy. And you run through the relevant framework, gather the information you've identified as actually necessary, give yourself a real deadline, and decide. Not without thoughtfulness, but without the grinding, circular, exhausting process that used to characterize every major choice. You decide, you commit, and you turn your full energy toward implementing rather than continuing to deliberate. And when things don't go the way you hoped, because sometimes they won't, no matter how well you decide, you respond differently than you used to. You don't spiral into second-guessing every element of how you chose. You don't retreat into, I should have thought longer. You ask what this is teaching you, what you'd do differently next time, and what the most useful next move is from here. Then you make that move. This is the decisive life, not a life without doubt, a life where doubt doesn't have veto power. The compound effect of living this way is extraordinary, and it shows up across every domain simultaneously. Your relationships deepen because you're actually present in them, not mentally composing your responses or analyzing the subtext of every exchange, but genuinely there, genuinely listening, genuinely engaged. People feel this. They respond to it. The quality of your connections improves in direct proportion to the quality of your presence. Your work accelerates because you're spending your energy on implementation rather than deliberation. Ideas that used to die in the planning phase get built. Projects that used to stall at the I'm not quite ready stage get launched. And launched imperfect things teach you more in a week than planned. Perfect things teach you in a year. Your health improves genuinely, measurably, because the chronic low-grade stress of perpetual indecision dissipates. Your sleep gets better, your energy levels stabilize, your immune system, which chronic cortisol suppresses, starts functioning as designed. You didn't change your diet or your exercise routine. You changed your relationship with uncertainty, and your body responds. Your sense of self, your core confidence in who you are and what you're capable of, grows in a way that feels different from any confidence you've experienced before. Not the brittle confidence of, I've planned this thoroughly enough that it should work. The deep, resilient confidence of, I've proven to myself through dozens of actual decisions that I can handle what comes. That confidence doesn't shatter when circumstances are difficult. It was built from difficulty. It holds. Here's what I want to leave you with, because it matters more than any specific technique in this entire piece. The overthinking you've been doing, the loops and the spirals and the endless analysis, it was never actually about the decisions. The decisions were the surface. Underneath was something older and deeper, a belief that you couldn't trust yourself to navigate uncertainty, a fear that without complete information and perfect planning, you weren't equipped to handle whatever came. That belief was never true. It was a story, a convincing, pervasive, well-rehearsed story, but a story nonetheless. The evidence against it is already inside your own history, if you look honestly. You've navigated uncertainty before. You've recovered from wrong turns before. You've handled outcomes you didn't plan for and found your way through them. You've done this dozens, probably hundreds of times. You are already more capable than your anxiety has been willing to admit. What changes now isn't your capability. What changes is your willingness to act from it. Every decision you make quickly, even imperfectly, even incompletely, even with that familiar flicker of doubt still present, is a vote for the version of you that trusts itself. A small piece of evidence against the old story, a deposit in the account that eventually produces unshakable confidence. You don't have to feel ready to start. You just have to start. The ceiling is waiting. The 1:47 a.m. loops are optional. The life that's been on pause while you've been deliberating, it's still there, still possible, still yours. The only question is the same one it's always been. What are you going to do first?